All right, I am up again. We're covering Sunvolt for the first time, and this is their debut album, Trace. And the opening montage you heard, Drown, not Down, Drown, right? Don't screw those up, Josh. Drown, and then now you're going to hear a clip from Tear Stained Eye.
Saint Genevieve can hold back the water, but saints don't bother with the tear-stained eye.
All right, so Trace by Sunvolt came out on September 19th, 1995. The genres include alt-rock, alt-country, folk rock, and Americana. Artists that influenced Sunvolt include Buck Owens, Hank Williams, Johnny Cash, Neil Young, The Byrds, The Replacements, Graham Parsons, R.E.M., Steve Earle, and Willie Nelson. Their highest charted album, it's actually a tie between 1997's Straightaways and 2009's American Central Dust. They both reached number 44 on the Billboard charts. Highest charting single is Drown from 1995 on this record. That hit number 10 on the U.S. mainstream rock charts. And a little history here. They were formed in 1994 by Jay Farrar, singer and guitar player, after the dissolution of his first band, Uncle Tupelo, which we covered earlier than this decade, right? We did Anodyne a while back, which was Uncle Tupelo's last album. If you remember, he was in that band with Jeff Tweedy, so Uncle Tupelo breaks up, mostly because Jay Farrar just did not like the ascension of Jeff Tweedy as becoming more of a songwriter, more of a voice. It started off as Jay Farrar's band, and I think my brother just said he read a really good autobiography by Jeff Tweedy, and Tweedy writes in that book that he very much would have stayed. He was totally in on Uncle Tupelo. He would have stayed. Things would have turned out very differently, but Farrar just did not want to be with him anymore in the same band. So
we covered that a lot in the Uncle Tupelo bio when we covered that album.
Yeah.
He wanted to be the top dog.
He wanted to be the top dog, and so he got the opportunity here. But he did bring along...
The record company kept picking the Jeff Tweedy songs as the songs they featured, too.
That happened more latter part. Yeah, Tweedy was writing more songs, and I think in one in particular that they wanted his to be the A-side and Farrar's to be the B-side, and he wasn't a fan of that. So, yeah. So when Farrar goes to form Uncle Tupelo, actually most of the guys that were in Uncle Tupelo went with Jeff Tweedy as he formed Wilco. But Jay Farrar did bring their former drummer, Mike Haydorn, who had actually left Uncle Tupelo to be with his family, but he comes back to be with Farrar in Sunvolt. And they also bring along brothers Jim and Dave Boquist on guitar and bass, and other multi-instrumentalists. I think they might have been both multi-instrumentalists, but so you've got a foursome here, and the Boquist brothers were based in Minneapolis, and Farrar and Haydorn were based in St. Louis. So the band kind of traveled between both cities, using both of them as their headquarters during their early years. Wilco's debut album, AM, was released 6 months earlier than Trace, but Trace eventually outsold it 2-1. But it was the only time that Sunvolt actually outsold Wilco, because Wilco became much more popular in subsequent years. In the 90s, Sunvolt released a couple more albums. They released 2 more, and then they went on hiatus after the 1999 tour. Jay Farrar goes on to record some solo albums and decides that they're going to look at getting the band back together in 2004. But they're kind of negotiating how things are going to work out, and it doesn't really go too well. And Farrar says, "Screw it! I'm just going to reform the band with a bunch of other guys." So Sunvolt continued. They've released 11 total albums, and their most recent was 2023's Day of the Dug. That was their most recent one. Jay Farrar's been the only continuous member of the band. There's currently 5 members in Sunvolt and 12 former members. So there's not a whole lot of bio here. There's not a lot of drama. It's just like a band doing their thing. Jay Farrar kind of, carrying the band on, bringing new guys in. Other guys are leaving and stuff, but still kind of keeping it within this genre. Whereas Wilco went out and branched out and did a lot of different things, which I'm sure we're going to get to in subsequent episodes. This is pretty much what you get with Sunvolt, and I would say it's the album that many consider to be their best, their debut record. So let's start this time with John. What's your take on Trace?
I was going to ask you, this is their debut, huh?
Yep.
And what's their most recent one? Do you know what their most recent one is?
It's 2023's Day of the Dug.
Day of the Doug. I know you mentioned that in there, so I'm going to do that. I would guess that Trace and Day of the Doug sound exactly the same because I now know, I think a little when like I've had takes with Matt where like he's had takes and I'm kind of baffled a little bit because I know to some degree how Matt feels about this album, whether it be like Sonic Youth or Bone Thugs, the Stone album and stuff. This album was fine, but it felt like I was listening to the same song 11 times. And like my first take, and which is okay, it's perfectly okay. But as the album went on, I just was like, all right. Like it's the same song. And like we listened to an Uncle Tupelo album, which was also at times samey, but it was a better like version of this. There was more that like sort of brought me in, and I'm thinking that this genre, I always call this genre Mattcore, is like what I call this.
It's like Americana, right?
Americana, yeah,
alt rock, roots rock,
Americana, alt rock, roots rock. I've joked and called it Mattcore because there's a lot of albums that Matt really loves in this album. I'm fine on Mattcore. There's nothing wrong with it. It's kind of like what my complaint was like with like Oasis, right? Where I was like everything's sort of like a cover of something else, and it's fine and it's appealing, but part of like what I need is like a little bit of boundary pushing at stuff. And like I look at an album like this and I'm like, I don't know if I would ever want to see this band live, because I just feel like it's sort of like the jam band thing where even though they're doing different things, it sort of sounds like 1 hour of the same song over and over again. And there's versions of like Tear Stained Eye and Windfall and Drown are songs I really liked, and they're certainly good songs, but like I almost feel like I only want to ever hear 1 or 2 songs from bands of this genre, because it's like, oh, that's a pleasant song, but then the more I listen to the album version of it, the more fatigued I get from listening to it. It's sort of like being given a slice of cake, but then like, and the cake is good, and you're like, oh, I like that cake, I would buy that again. But then you eat like 12 pieces of the same cake, and then suddenly it's not as appealing anymore. And that's kind of how I felt about this album. It's very much in the middle for me, because there's nothing wrong with it. But I feel for me, once I've heard one of these Americana albums, they start to kind of bleed together for me, and it's hard for me to differentiate what makes the Jayhawks different than this, for example. Like now, Uncle Tupelo did stand out a little bit more. I just thought there was like a pop craftsmanship and a quality to the choruses that was missing here.
Didn't you
I think
like the Jeff Tweedy stuff more or something like that?
I did. And if you remember correctly, almost all of the songs that I mentioned I liked in Uncle Tupelo, I remember Matt laughing. He's like, oh, those are all like the Jeff Tweedy songs. And I know Wilco. And Wilco does a lot more derivations, right, of this. And I respected that they weren't, while I didn't love everything they did, I respected they took chances. I just think like after a while for me, this style of music just, a lot of times also there just aren't choruses that hook me. They just sort of, the chorus feels like it bleeds into the verse and along the way. And so I'm just thoroughly in the middle for this one. It was fine, but it doesn't, for me, re-warrant a listen, if I'm being honest.
Yeah. You think it, in some respects, like this type of music looks back as opposed to like pushing boundaries like you maybe want. I think maybe.
Yeah, it's very nostalgic sounding.
Yeah.
It's even the first song talks about like somewhere in Louisiana, it sounds like 1963 and the AM radio and yeah, it's a lot of like wistfulness, and I think there's like for certain people there's an emotional resonance to it because of the nostalgia, but I think I've been firm on my stance on nostalgia that I hate it. So like it doesn't hit as hard for me, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Matt, do you still listen to Sunvolt? Are you like current listener to their new album or anything?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Just curious. Yeah, I like this album. I agree with a lot of the points that John made. I think with this genre of album, whereas John kind of like feels like it runs on or sounds the same, I feel like I get kind of like a pleasing feeling sounding listening to this. Like it's pleasant to me, but it's not like groundbreaking or something that I seek out. But when I hear it, like on this and Uncle Tupelo and some of the other albums in this genre, I'm always like, oh yeah, this is good. This is like good music to listen to. Like I appreciate what they do. I feel John definitely named like the best 3 tracks on the album, but I like their ability to do a style of country music that I find appealing and not kind of like schmaltzy, and then be able to transition into like more rock oriented music. They do that. So I like their ability to do both. I like Jay Farrar's voice on this. He's kind of got like this deep country voice without much of a twang, which I think works really well on this. I always like some of the instrumentation that's in this genre of music and in country music. Like I think pedal steel makes an appearance, probably. I think it's on like Tear Stained Eye, pedal steel, but those types of instruments like dobro or strings or fiddle when that comes into play. Sometimes this type of music and this album particularly like remind me of like Neil Young at times too, which I think is a positive for me. He's very prolific, as we know. And they just use some like classic kind of riffs too, like on Drown and well, that's the main one that I'm thinking of. But I like the incorporation of electric guitar into like this country sound too, and this hybrid of rock and country, like on Live Free, which second track kind of works for me. It doesn't like. The album doesn't rise in my mind as like a kind of groundbreaking or transcendent album for me, but it's really solid in what it does. And so that's enough for me, I think, on week to week, and I enjoyed it. So thumbs up.
Yeah. So there was definitely a period in my life when I was first introduced to this kind of music that I was like, what the hell is this? Because I grew up listening to I guess my first love was either 80s synth pop and or 80s hair metal, right?
Yeah.
And then as I kind of got, then I started getting more into, like the 90s alt rock and grunge and stuff like that. So that was kind of like where what my lane was. And when I first started hearing this, like my brother was the first one that told me about these bands. And I definitely did not like the country twang, growing up in a town where there's lots of country music, not this kind, but more of the Nashville pop, Garth Brooks type stuff, Alan Jackson. That was never appealing to me. And so just hearing a slide guitar or anything that's country elements made me go, ugh. So it was it took a while for this to kind of, for me to get past that and kind of get into just this sound. And since then,
Slow burn Matt Core.
Slow burn Matt Core. Probably middle of like college is when I really started kind of picking the stuff up more, listening to it more, getting into other artists. My uncle is huge into this stuff too. He's got guy go on to Bonnaroo, went to Bonnaroo with. I don't do that anymore, but has his own radio show out of St. Augustine that he plays all this stuff. So it's all Americana. So saw plenty of shows with him. And so over the years, I've definitely grown an affinity for this type of music. It's definitely backwards looking. It's, Neil Young is they're very much influenced, at least Sunvolt and a lot of these other artists influenced by Neil Young. Mm-hmm. Neil Young has country elements. There's folk, right? There is an Americana roots rock thing here. And that really resonates with a lot of people, myself included. It's been interesting kind of going back to records like this that that don't really stretch any boundaries, and after listening to records like Scott Walker, right, the stuff that's like, what the hell is going on here, and then everything kind of in between, you do have a little bit more of an appreciation for those artists that are really kind of that are expanding the palette, that are trying different things, that are being more adventurous. So I think you definitely give them points for that. And so I get what John's saying about like this is kind of all blending together. And I think part of that, it's similar to what my thing was we just did Bone Thugs and Harmony. It's like that's all kind of, it's all the same kind of thing, and I'm having a hard time differentiating it. And it's just, I think mainly it's because ears aren't trained to listen to a certain genre as much as they are to others, right? So I could definitely differentiate sounds in this album. To me, it's not, there's a samey element to it, but like there's songs in here that are definitely distinct for me, definitely distinguishable from other ones. I like the variety on here in terms of there's songs that are more full band electric rock songs, and there are other songs that are pretty ballads with acoustic, a melancholy kind of, thoughtful songs.
Can I jump in real quick just to see if it, because Bone Thugs is an interesting corollary. You would never put the two together, but I think there's a lot of fair to what you're saying, Matt. I think for me, the beats on Bone Thugs had a lot of variety, but I could see how the lyrical part, right, like ran together for you. I feel the same about this album. The guitar parts were different. Some were louder, some were more. But at the end of the day, it was a lot of like "Wasted Line, Real December," like vocal. And it just kind of that was the part that kind of like seemed universal to me. So maybe like how when you heard the Bone Thugs parts, because I did see differentiation musically. Yeah,
it's how it hits your ear, right? And if you're focused on just one element of it that you can't really get past, or it just stands out so much, then it's going to be harder to differentiate. But my ears are trained for this type of thing, right? I think this is great music to see live. Although I will say I have seen Sunvolt. Jay Farrar is not the best. He's like one of these shy dudes who just stands there and just like, he looks bored. So he's not the best performer, but I'm just talking more of like this genre of like, you go see a drive-by trucker show or something like that. Those guys are feeling it. You're getting a real show there. So it's just kind of interesting how, different people's backgrounds, different people's go-tos, really influence them. And you hear, it's like a different language, right? It's like we can both hear the same language, but it makes absolutely no sense to this one person, but to another person, it's making all the sense in the world. And so it's just kind of interesting. But yeah, I Josh, you ask if I go back to Sunvolt a whole lot. Not really. But there's, but I honestly, I'm not really listen to any new albums or anything like that. But my interest in Sunvolt kind of waned after these first three albums in the 90s. I didn't really pick up anything after that because I know, John, you're probably absolutely right. This is Sunvolt albums. You know what you're going to get. This is just, they stay in their lane. They're very good, I would say, what they do. Jay Farrar is still a very good songwriter. There's some really pretty melodies in here. There's some catchy stuff happening. There's the rock parts are really good. And there's people that just like that, the safety of that, right?
Yeah,
But it also doesn't transcend across the board, right? The second album, Straightaways, I would argue is inferior to this, whereas the album that came after that, which was, I'd have to think about that in a second. But that was I like the third album. It actually rocks out more. Wide String Tremolo from 1998. That's more of a rock based album. But so yeah, but I do like coming back to this. There is a part of me, I am more nostalgic. I do like this. This reminds me not just of, older music, but just times, shows that I've been to, family members, friends that are into this type of thing. And there's definitely a place in my record collection for this type of music. And I've just, my ears have been trained. But generally speaking, Windfall, Tear Stained Eye, Drown are all really strong. I really do like Too Early. I think that's a beautiful penultimate song. Mystifies Me is actually a cover. It's written by Ronnie Wood from the Rolling Stones. I just learned that covering that here. But I think it does a good job of weaving in and out of like, a rock song, more of a ballad than a rock song. So there's variety here. They don't, they kind of mix it up there to keep you a little interested. So it's going to be interesting when we cover Wilco because they definitely go in different directions. But I feel this is a very solid record, and it's a very familiar thing for me to go back to, and I'm thumbs up on it. I like this stuff.
One day I'm gonna write a Matt Core song, and it's gonna be something like open road by the river, looking back, smell your hair, as time stood still, something like that. And I'm just gonna write something kind of like and put it together, and it's gonna be a Christmas gift to you, Matt. I'm gonna write I'm gonna get a guitarist, and I'm gonna. In fact, the guy I work with right now plays the guitar, and I think that might be, and you'll just get a CD from me with the Matt Core song on it.
I look forward to that, John.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it's gonna be probably the greatest gift I can give you, the deepest meaning.